Welcome to Horrified Stories, where fear comes to life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more spine-chilling tales. Let's start our today's story, The Call Being the Grave. A phone that rings only at midnight. It was nearing midnight when Jenna Morton returned to her inherited family home in the small, sleepy town of Willows Creek. A drizzling rain coated the windows, reflecting the warm glow of her porch light. After weeks of wrestling with lawyers and accountants over her late uncle's estate, she was ready to settle in for the night and enjoy the solitude of her childhood refuge. Jenna's uncle, Victor, had been an eccentric recluse. His towering Victorian-style house, shrouded in ivy and gloom, stood out like a specter among the modern suburban dwellings. The house had been left to her in his will, but she hadn't stepped inside it since she was a teenager. Memories of summers spent playing hide-and-seek in its labyrinthine hallways and discovering old books in the creaking library filled her mind as she unlocked the front door. The interior was a time capsule. Antique furniture, faded wallpaper, and the faint scent of cedar greeted her. She dropped her bags in the foyer, her footsteps echoing ominously in the cavernous space. A shiver ran through her as she glanced toward the sitting room, where an ancient rotary phone sat on an end table. Jenna didn't think much of the phone at first. It was just another relic from her uncle's peculiar collection. She headed to the kitchen, reheated leftover lasagna, and poured herself a glass of wine. The silence of the house felt oppressive, so she switched on the dusty radio, tuning it to a soft jazz station. The clock on the wall ticked louder than she remembered. As the hands crept toward midnight, an inexplicable tension began to settle in her chest. She couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, though she dismissed it as nerves from being alone in such a vast, empty space. Just as the clock struck 12, the shrill ring of the rotary phone pierced the stillness. Jenna frowned, her fork suspended midair. The sound was impossibly loud, reverberating through the walls like a scream. She set her fork down and slowly made her way to the sitting room. The phone rang again and again, each chime more urgent than the last. Who would be calling at this hour? And on this phone? Jenna didn't even know if it was connected. Tentatively, she picked up the receiver. "Hello," she said, her voice trembling. For a moment, there was nothing but static. Then, a voice hoarse and distant spoke. Jenna, her heart raced. The voice was eerily familiar, yet she couldn't place it. "Who is this?" she demanded, her grip tightening on the receiver. "Do not go to the basement," the voice rasped before the line went dead. Jenna stared at the phone in disbelief, her pulse pounding in her ears. The basement. She hadn't even thought about the basement. What could possibly be down there? Suddenly, the lights flickered. A deep rumble echoed through the house, followed by a low, guttural noise that seemed to emanate from beneath her feet. She backed away from the phone, her stomach knotting with fear. The rational part of her brain told her it was just an old house settling, but the ominous voice on the phone suggested otherwise. Determined not to let fear consume her, Jenna grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made her way to the basement door. The air grew colder as she approached. The door itself was heavy, painted a dull gray, with a rusted lock that was already unlatched. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the handle. A sudden knock on the front door made her jump. Relieved for the distraction, she rushed to the entryway. Through the peephole, she saw a man standing in the rain, his face obscured by the brim of a soaking hat. "Who's there?" she called through the door. "Miss Morgan," the man replied in a gravelly voice. "I'm Detective Hall. May I come in?" "A detective?" Jenna hesitated but eventually opened the door. The man stepped inside, water dripping from his coat. He had a weathered face, sharp eyes, and an air of authority. "I'm sorry to disturb you so late," he said, removing his hat, "but I need to ask you a few questions about your uncle's death." "His death?" Jenna repeated, confused. "It was a heart attack, wasn't it?" "That's what we thought," Hall replied, his gaze shifting toward the sitting room. "But there have been unusual circumstances. I'd like to take a look around, if you don't mind." Jenna nodded, unease growing in her chest. She followed Hall as he examined the house, his expression unreadable. When they reached the basement door, he paused. "Have you been down here?" he asked, his voice low. "No," she admitted, "but I was about to." "Don't," he interrupted sharply, his face pale. Jenna blinked, startled by his intensity. "Why not?" Hall hesitated, then turned to her with a grave expression. "Because the last time someone went down there," he said, "they didn't come back." Detective Hall's words hung in the air like an unspoken threat. Jenna stared at him, searching for any hint that he might be joking, but his solemn expression revealed nothing. "What do you mean?" They didn't come back, she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hall glanced at the basement door, his jaw tightening. Your uncle wasn't the first owner of this house to die under strange circumstances. The previous tenant, a man named Harold Crowley, disappeared years ago. He was last seen entering the basement. Jenna's mouth went dry. She didn't remember hearing about any of this. I thought my uncle bought this house decades ago, she said. He did, Hall confirmed, right after Crowley vanished. The case went cold, and Victor bought the property at a steep discount. No one questioned it much back then. Jenna shivered, pulling her cardigan tighter around her. So, what are you saying? That my uncle was involved in something? Hall hesitated, then lowered his voice. I don't know, but there've been rumors, strange noises, lights flickering, and now your uncle's sudden death. Before Jenna could respond, the phone in the sitting room rang again, slicing through the heavy silence like a knife. Hall's eyes snapped to the sound, his brow furrowing. Is that connected? I don't know, Jenna admitted, her voice shaky. It started ringing last night. No one's used it in years. The detective strode into the sitting room, his movements deliberate. Jenna followed, her heart pounding as the phone continued to ring. Hall picked up the receiver, his expression hardening as he held it to his ear. Who is this? He demanded. For a moment, there was only static, then the same hoarse, distant voice spoke. Leave the house, it rasped before it's too late. Hall's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't flinch. Who are you? What do you know about this place? The line crackled with interference, and the voice grew faint. They'll take her, just like they took the others. The connection went dead? Hall set the receiver down slowly, his face pale. Jenna's legs felt like jelly, and she sank onto the sofa, clutching a throw pillow. What did they mean? She whispered. I don't know, Hall admitted, but I think it's best if you don't stay here tonight. Jenna shook her head. I can't just leave. This is my home now. Miss Morgan, you don't understand. A loud crash from upstairs interrupted him, both of them frownsy, their eyes darting toward the ceiling. What was that? Jenna whispered, her voice trembling. Hall motioned for her to stay put and pulled a flashlight from his coat pocket. He started up the stairs cautiously, his step creaking under his weight. Jenna hesitated for a moment before grabbing a kitchen knife and following him, unable to bear the thought of being left alone. The hallway was dark, the air heavy with an unexplainable chill. Hall pushed open the door to one of the guest bedrooms, shining his flashlight inside. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, rainwater pooling on the floor beneath it. Did you leave this open? Hall asked, glancing over his shoulder. No, Jenna replied, her voice barely audible. Hall's flashlight beam swept across the room, landing on the closet door. It was ajar, a thin sliver of darkness peeking through. He approached cautiously, gesturing for Jenna to stay back. She ignored him, clutching her knife tightly as she followed. Hall reached for the closet handle, his hand trembling slightly. With one swift motion, he yanked it open. The closet was empty. Jenna let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. It's just the wind, she said, though her tone lacked conviction. Hall wasn't convinced. His flashlight scanned the closet, lingering on a faint, dusty outline of a handprint on the back wall. That's not the wind, he muttered. Before Jenna could respond, a faint whisper echoed down the hallway. It was a soft, unintelligible sound, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. Did you hear that? She asked, her grip tightening on the knife. Hall nodded, his jaw set. Stay close. They followed the sound, which seemed to lead them toward the master bedroom. The door was shut, but a faint light flickered underneath it, as if a candle were burning inside. Jenna's stomach churned. I didn't leave any lights on in there. Hall placed a hand on the doorknob, then hesitated. Whatever happens, don't let go of that knife, he said. She nodded, though her hands were shaking. He pushed the door open, and the two of them stepped inside. The room was eerily still. The source of the flickering light was an old oil lamp sitting on the nightstand, its flame casting long, distorted shadows across the walls. The bed was neatly made, but something about the room felt wrong. Jenna's eyes were drawn to the mirror above the dresser. At first, she thought it was just her reflection, but then she realized the image wasn't moving in sync with her. The figure in the mirror was staring straight at her, its mouth slowly curling into a grotesque grin. Jenna, he whispered, its voice low and guttural. She stumbled backward, bumping into Hall. Do you see that? She gasped. He followed her gaze, his eyes narrowing. Get out of the room, he ordered, his voice firm. Before they could move, the lamp flickered violently, and the door slammed shut behind them. The figure in the mirror began to laugh, a chilling, echoing sound that filled the room. Jenna screamed as the floor beneath them seemed to shudder, and a deep, guttural growl rose from somewhere below. "Jenna, run!" Hall shouted, grabbing her arm and dragging her toward the door. The laughter grew louder, almost deafening, as they fought to pry the door open. Finally, it gave way, and they stumbled into the hallway, slamming the door behind them. Breathing heavily, Jenna turned to Hall. "What is happening in this house?" He shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's tied to that basement. We need to leave it now." Before Jenna could argue, the phone rang again, its shrill tone echoing through the house. The phone's relentless ringing echoed through the house, piercing the suffocating silence that had enveloped them. Jenna clutched her knife, her knuckles white. "Don't answer it," Hall warned, his voice low. Jenna hesitated, but the compulsion to pick it up was overwhelming, as if the sound itself was pulling her toward the sitting room. Without thinking, she moved toward the phone. "Jenna, stop!" Hall shouted, but it was too late. She lifted the receiver, the cold plastic chilling against her skin. "Hello." The voice on the other end was clearer this time, though it still had that eerie, rasping quality. "Why didn't you leave?" it hissed. Jenna's breath hitched. "Who are you? What do you want?" The voice ignored her questions. "You don't understand what you've inherited. It's not just a house, it's a gateway." "A gateway," she repeated, her pulse quickening. "To them," the voice replied, trembling with fear. "They're coming, Jenna, and when they do, you'll wish you never stepped foot in this place." Before she could respond, the line went dead, leaving only the hum of the dial tone. Hall grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the phone. "Enough of this," he said. "We're leaving now." Jenna shook her head. "You don't understand. This is my family's house. My uncle." "Your uncle knew what was down there," Hall interrupted, "and he still died because of it. Do you want to end up like him?" Jenna looked at him, torn between fear and determination. "If it's so dangerous, why are you still here?" The detective hesitated, then sighed. "Because I've seen too many people go missing in this town, too many unexplained deaths, and they all lead back to this house." Jenna's heart sank. "Then we need to figure out what's happening. If this place is responsible, we can't just run away." Hall stared at her for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine, but we're not splitting up, and we're staying away from that basement unless we absolutely have to." They returned to the kitchen, where Hall spread out a series of documents and photographs he'd brought with him. Jenna recognized some of the pictures of black and white images of the house when it was first built. This place was constructed in the late 1800s by a man named Elias Blackwood. Hall explained he was a wealthy industrialist, but also a rumored occultist. According to town records, he held secret gatherings in the basement, though no one knows exactly what went on down there. Jenna frowned, tracing her finger over one of the photographs. "What happened to him?" "He disappeared," Hall said grimly, "just like Crowley, just like several others who lived here over the years." Jenna shivered, her unease deepening. "And my uncle, did he know about this?" Hall nodded. "I believe he did. I found some of his notes while investigating his death. He was researching Blackwood's rituals. I think he was trying to stop whatever was happening here." Jenna's mind raced. If her uncle had been trying to stop it, then perhaps there was a way to put an end to the horrors of the house. A sudden crash from the basement jolted them both. "What the hell was that?" Jenna whispered, her heart pounding. Hall grabbed his flashlight and motioned for her to stay behind. "Stay here. I'll check it out." "No," Jenna said firmly. "We go together." Reluctantly, Hall agreed, and the two of them approached the basement door. The air grew colder with each step, and the strange, guttural growl they'd heard earlier grew louder. Hall opened the door slowly, revealing a dark, yawning staircase. The flashlight beam barely penetrated the thick shadows. "Stay close," he said, his voice tense. Jenna nodded, gripping her knife tightly as they descended. The stairs creaked under their weight, and the air grew heavier with each step. When they reached the bottom, the flashlight revealed a cluttered, cobweb-covered space filled with old furniture and crates. But something about the room felt alive. "Look," Hall said, pointing to the floor. Jenna followed his gaze and saw a series of strange symbols etched into the concrete. They formed a large, intricate circle, and in its center lay a small wooden box. "What is that?" Jenna asked, her voice barely audible. Hall shook his head. "I don't know, but I don't like it." He stepped forward cautiously, his flashlight flickering as if the battery was dying. The groaning sound grew louder, resonating through the walls. Suddenly, the symbols on the floor began to glow, casting an eerie, reddish light. Jenna's stomach twisted as a sense of overwhelming dread washed over her. "We need to leave," Hall said urgently, grabbing her arm. But before they could retreat, the wooden box in the center of the circle burst open, releasing a cloud of thick, black smoke. The smoke coiled and twisted like a living thing, forming the vague shape of a figure. It had no face, only a hollow void where its features should have been. Its presence radiated malice, and the growling sound seemed to emanate from within it. "Run!" Hall shouted, pulling Jenna toward the stairs. The figure lunged at them, its shadowy tendrils reaching out like claws. Jenna screamed as one of the tendrils grazed her arm, leaving a searing, icy pain in its wake. They scrambled up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind them. The growling stopped abruptly, leaving only the sound of their labored breathing. Jenna looked at Hall, her arm throbbing with pain. "What was that thing?" Hall shook his head, his face pale. "I don't know, but whatever it is, it's tied to this house and it doesn't want us here." Before either of them could say more, the phone rang again. The phone's piercing ring echoed through the house once more, louder and more insistent than ever. Jenna and Hall stood frowning, their breath visible in the frigid air that had inexplicably settled around them. "Don't answer it," Hall said firmly, gripping her arm. Jenna, trembling but resolute, shook her head. "I have to. This thing, whatever it is, it's not going to stop until we face it." Ignoring Hall's protests, she made her way back to the sitting room, her steps heavy with dread. The phone Saturday on its table, vibrating slightly with each ring as though it were alive. She picked up the receiver. "What do you want from me?" she demanded, her voice shaking. The static on the other end seemed to pulse like a heartbeat before the raspy voice spoke again. "It's not what I want. It's what they want," it hissed. "Who are they?" Jenna pressed, tears pricking her eyes. "The ones Blackwood called," the voice rasped. "The ones your uncle tried to stop. But it's too late now. You've opened the way." The line went dead, and Jenna slammed the receiver down, her chest heaving. Hall grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "What did it say?" he asked. "The way is open," she murmured. "It's the basement. That circle, the box. We need to destroy it." "Are you insane?" Hall snapped. "You saw what happened down there. That thing almost killed us. If we don't stop it, it'll kill more than just us." Jenna shot back, her voice rising. "This is my responsibility, my family's legacy." Hall hesitated, his expression torn. Finally, he sighed. "Fine, but we do this carefully. One wrong move, and we might not make it out alive." They gathered what they could, salt from the kitchen, a book of matches, and an old fire poker Hall found near the fireplace. Jenna's arm throbbed where the creature had touched her, the skin now marked with a faint, branching scar that pulsed faintly with light. "You okay?" Hall asked, eyeing the scar warily. Jenna nodded, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "Let's just get this over with." They descended the basement stairs once more, the air growing colder and thicker with each step. The symbols on the floor were glowing faintly now, pulsing in rhythm with the scar on Jenna's arm. "It's reacting to you," Hall muttered, gripping the fire poker tightly. Jenna swallowed hard. "Then let's use that to our advantage." She stepped cautiously toward the circle, her pulse racing. The wooden box in the center was still open, its contents now visible, a withered parchment covered in indecipherable runes, and a small, black stone that seemed to absorb the faint light around it. "This is it," Jenna said, her voice barely audible. Hall moved beside her, sprinkling a line of salt around the circle. "We need to break the connection," he said. "Destroy the stone and the parchment. Hopefully, that'll close whatever portal this is." Jenna nodded, reaching for the black stone. The moment her fingers touched it, a violent shock coursed through her body, and she was thrown backward. "Jenna!" Hall shouted, rushing to her side. She groaned, sitting up slowly. "I'm fine," she lied, though her entire body felt like it was on fire. The shadowy figure began to materialize again, its form twisting and writhing as it emerged from the circle. Its growls filled the room, and the walls trembled with an unearthly force. Hall swung the fire poker at the creature, but it passed through harmlessly, the metal turning ice cold in his hands. "It's not working," he yelled. Jenna staggered to her feet, her gaze locked on the glowing symbols. "It's the circle," she realized. "We have to break it." Hall didn't hesitate. He grabbed a nearby crate and hurled it at the floor, shattering part of the etched pattern. The glow flickered, and the creature let out an ear-piercing shriek, its form momentarily destabilizing. "It's working," Jenna cried. She grabbed the matches and struck one, lighting the parchment on fire. The runes ignited instantly, the flames burning an unnatural green as they consumed the paper. The creature lunged toward her, its tendrils flailing wildly. But as the last of the parchment turned to ash, the circle's glow faded entirely. The shadowy figure let out one final, agonized roar before collapsing into a swirling mass of black smoke that was quickly sucked into the wooden box. The box snapped shut with a deafening crack, and then silence. Jenna and all stood frowning, their breaths ragged. The oppressive weight that had filled the house was gone, replaced by an eerie stillness. "Is it over?" Jenna asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Hall nodded, though his expression remained cautious for now. They carried the box upstairs and buried it deep in the woods behind the house, sealing it with another ring of salt. When they returned, the house felt lighter, almost welcoming. Jenna collapsed onto the sofa, her head in her hands. "Thank you," she said to Hall. He shook his head. "Don't thank me yet. If the thing gets loose again." "It won't," Jenna said firmly. "I'll make sure of it." Hall gave her a small, weary smile before heading to the door. "Take care of yourself, Jenna, and if you ever hear that phone ring again, I'll burn the house down," she said, managing a weak laugh. Hall nodded and left, disappearing into the night. As Jenna sat alone in the quiet house, she couldn't help but glance toward the sitting room, where the rotary phone sat silently on its table. She prayed it would never ring again. If you like this story, don't forget to hit the like button, share and subscribe the channel. Help us grow. Thanks for watching.